Get out of my way, logistics! Lance Morrison's voice cut through the morning air like a blade as he shoved past the small woman, struggling with her worn backpack. She stumbled, her old boots scraping against the concrete of the NATO training facility, but she didn't fall, just steadied herself with the quiet grace of someone used to being pushed around. The other cadets laughed, that sharp, cutting sound that echoes through every military compound where egos run wild. Here was their morning entertainment. A woman who looked like she'd taken a wrong turn from the motor pool, standing among the elite trainees of one of the most prestigious boot camps in the world. Seriously, who let the janitor in? Madison Brooks tossed her perfect blonde ponytail and gestured at the woman's faded t-shirt and scuffed boots. This isn't a soup kitchen. The woman, Olivia Mitchell according to the roster, said nothing. She just picked up her backpack with those careful, precise movements and walked toward the barracks. Her silence only made them laugh harder. But in exactly 18 minutes, when that torn shirt revealed what was hidden beneath, every single person in that yard would understand they had made the biggest mistake of their military careers. The commander himself would freeze mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he recognized a symbol that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. A symbol that would change everything. If you're already hooked by this story of hidden identity and military justice, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales. Trust me, what happens to Olivia in the next few minutes will make you believe that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Now, let's go back to that training yard where everything was about to change. Olivia Mitchell had arrived at the NATO training facility in a beat-up pickup truck that looked like it had seen better decades. The paint was chipped, the tires caked with mud from some forgotten back road. And when she climbed out, everything about her screamed ordinary. Her jeans were wrinkled, her windbreaker faded to an indeterminate green, and her sneakers had holes that let the morning dew seep through to her socks. Nobody would have guessed she came from one of the wealthiest families in the country, raised in a world of private tutors and gated estates. But Olivia didn't carry that world with her. No designer labels, no manicured nails, just a plain face and clothes that looked like they'd been washed 100 times. Her backpack was held together by a single stubborn strap, and her boots were so scuffed they might have belonged to a homeless veteran. But it wasn't just her appearance that set her apart. It was her stillness. The way she stood with her hands in her pockets, watching the chaos of the camp like she was waiting for a signal only she could hear. While other cadets strutted and postured, measuring each other up with the aggressive confidence of youth and privilege, Olivia simply observed. The first day was designed to be a gauntlet. Captain Harrow, the head instructor, was a mountain of a man with a voice that could stop a riot and shoulders that looked like they'd been carved from granite. He paced the yard, sizing up the cadets with the calculating gaze of a predator selecting prey. "You!" he barked, pointing directly at Olivia. "What's your deal? Supply crew get lost?" The group snickered. Madison Brooks, with her sharp blonde ponytail and a smile that never reached her eyes, whispered to the cadet next to her loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet she's here to check a diversity box. Gender quota, right?" Olivia didn't blink. She looked at Captain Harrow, her face calm as still water, and said, "I'm a cadet, sir." Harrow snorted, waving her off like an annoying insect. "Get in line then. Don't slow us down." The mess hall that first evening was a battlefield of egos and testosterone. Olivia carried her tray to a corner table, away from the loud chatter and competitive storytelling. The room buzzed with recruits swapping tales of their accomplishments, their voices growing louder as they tried to outdo each other. Derek Chen, lean and cocky, with a buzz cut that looked like it came with an attitude, spotted her sitting alone. He grabbed his tray and strutted over, dropping it on her table with a deliberate clatter that made nearby tables turn to watch the show. "Yo, lost girl," he said, his voice pitched perfectly to carry across the room. "This ain't a soup kitchen. You sure you're not here to wash dishes?" The group behind him erupted in laughter. Olivia paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, and looked at him with those steady brown eyes. "I'm eating," she said simply. Derek leaned in, smirking. "Yeah, well, eat faster. You're taking up space real soldiers need." Without warning, he flicked her tray, sending a spoonful of mashed potatoes splattering across her shirt. The room howled with laughter. Phones came out, recording the humiliation for social media glory, but Olivia just reached for her napkin, wiped the mess with slow, methodical movements, and took another bite like Derek wasn't even there. The deliberate calm of her response seemed to infuriate him more than any comeback could have. Physical training the next morning was a test of endurance designed to separate the wheat from the chaff. Push-ups until arms shook, sprints that burned lungs, burpees in the dirt under a blazing sun. Olivia kept her breathing steady and controlled, but her shoelaces kept slipping loose. They were old and frayed, barely holding her boots together. During a sprint, Lance Morrison jogged up beside her. Lance was the group's golden boy, broad-shouldered with a grin that said he'd never lost at anything in his life and didn't plan to start now. "Yo, thrift store," he called out, loud enough for the whole line to hear. "Your shoes giving up, or is that just you?" Laughter rippled through the group like a wave. Olivia didn't respond. She simply knelt, retied her laces with quick, precise fingers, and stood. But as she did, Lance bumped her shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling. Her hands hit the mud, knees sinking into the wet earth. The group howled with delight. "What's that, Mitchell?" Lance said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You signing up to clean the floors, or just planning to be our personal punching bag?" Olivia got up, wiped her muddy palms on her pants, and resumed running without a word. The laughter followed her for the rest of the morning, but if it affected her, she didn't let it show. During a break, she sat on a wooden bench, pulling a granola bar from her bag. Madison sauntered over with two other cadets, her arms crossed, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "Olivia, right? So, where are you even from? Did you win some kind of contest to be here?" Her friends giggled, one covering her mouth like it was all too funny to contain. Olivia took a bite, chewed slowly, and looked up. "I applied." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, like she was stating the weather. Madison's smile tightened. "Okay, but why?" she pressed, leaning in. "You don't exactly scream elite soldier. I mean, look at your everything." She waved a dismissive hand at Olivia's muddy t-shirt and plain brown hair. Olivia set her granola bar down and leaned forward just enough to make Madison flinch. "I'm here to train," she said quietly. "Not to make you feel better about yourself." Madison froze, her cheeks reddening. "Whatever," she muttered, turning away. "Weirdo." The navigation drill that afternoon was designed to be a special kind of hell. Cadets had to cross a forested ridge, map in hand, under a strict time limit, survival of the fittest, military style. Olivia moved alone through the trees, her compass steady, her steps quiet against the pine needles. A group of 4 cadets led by Kyle Martinez spotted her checking her map under a large oak. Kyle was wiry and ambitious, the type who had been vying for Lance's spotlight since day one, and saw Olivia as an easy target to impress his peers. "Hey, Dora the Explorer," he called, his voice cutting through the quiet forest air. "You lost already, or you just out here picking flowers?" His group laughed, circling closer like a pack of wolves scenting weakness. Olivia folded her map with deliberate fingers and kept walking. But Kyle wasn't done performing for his audience. He jogged up and snatched the map from her hands. "Let's see how you do without this," he said, tearing it in half and tossing the pieces into the wind with theatrical flair. The others cheered. Olivia stopped, her eyes following the scraps as they fluttered away on the breeze. She looked at Kyle, her face completely blank, and said, "Hope you know your way back." Then she turned and kept moving, her pace unchanged, like losing the map was just another minor inconvenience. Kyle's laughter faltered, but his group kept jeering, their voices echoing through the trees. Olivia carefully secured her personal equipment in the reinforced gear locker, including her encrypted communication device featuring advanced military-grade smartphone technology with satellite connectivity capabilities. The ruggedized tablet she stored alongside had been designed specifically for extreme operational environments, its reinforced screen capable of withstanding battlefield conditions that would completely destroy standard civilian electronics used by the other cadets around her. The rifle disassembly drill came that afternoon, and it was designed to be the great equalizer. Every cadet had exactly 2 minutes to completely disassemble an M4 carbine, clean it thoroughly, and reassemble it to military specifications. Most of them struggled, their fingers fumbling with the pins, swearing under their breath as parts slipped from nervous hands. Lance finished in a messy 1 minute 43 seconds, grinning like he'd just aced a final exam. Madison scraped by at 1:59, her hands shaking as she snapped about the last piece into place. Then Olivia stepped up to the table. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. Her hands moved like they were following a script written in muscle memory. Pin out, bolt free, parts laid out in a perfect grid with surgical precision. 52 seconds. Not a single mistake, not a moment's hesitation. Sergeant Polk, the grizzled instructor overseeing the drill, stared at the timer, then at her, then back at the timer like it might be lying. "Mitchell," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Olivia wiped her hands on her pants and stepped back. "Practice," she said, her eyes fixed on the ground. The training screen behind them played a slow-motion replay of her performance, every movement clean and efficient, not a single wasted motion. A lieutenant nearby leaned over to Sergeant Polk, his voice carrying just far enough for others to hear. "Her hands didn't shake once. That's Special Forces steady." Lance overheard and scoffed loudly. "So, she can clean a gun," he said, making sure Olivia could hear every word. "Doesn't mean she can fight." But during the break that followed, a quiet cadet named Elena Rodriguez, who'd been watching Olivia closely, slipped her a spare map from her own kit. "You'll need this," Elena whispered, her eyes darting around to make sure no one saw the exchange. Olivia took it, nodded once, and tucked it into her bag without a word. It was the first act of kindness she'd received since arriving, and though her expression didn't change, something flickered in her eyes. Whispers started after that rifle drill. A few cadets began glancing at her during breaks, trying to piece together this puzzle of a woman who dressed like a vagrant but handled weapons like a professional. Olivia didn't seem to notice or care. She sat on the grass during rest periods, methodically retying her shoelaces, her face as unreadable as ever. Madison leaned over to Lance, her voice low but sharp with malice. "Bet she's got some tragic backstory. Poor kid from nowhere, trying to prove she's somebody." Lance laughed, the sound harsh in the afternoon air. "Yeah, well, she's proven she's nobody special." Olivia's fingers paused on her laces for just a moment. Then she kept tying, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was sealing something deep inside herself. The equipment shed was another opportunity for humiliation. Cadets lined up to receive gear for the next drill, and the quartermaster, a gruff older man named Gibbs, handed out vests and helmets with barely concealed disdain for the young recruits. When Olivia stepped up, he looked her over like she was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "What's this, a hobo convention?" he said, loud enough for the entire line to hear. "We don't got gear for civilians, sweetheart." He tossed her a tactical vest that was at least 2 sizes too big, the straps dangling uselessly. The cadets behind her snickered. "Maybe she can use it as a tent," one called out. Olivia caught the vest, her fingers tightening around the canvas for just a moment. She didn't argue, didn't ask for a replacement. She just slung it over her shoulder and walked out, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Behind her, Gibbs laughed and shook his head. "That one's going to wash out by tomorrow," he announced to the room. But outside, away from prying eyes, Olivia adjusted the oversized vest with a few quick practiced knots, transforming it into a perfect fit. Her hands moved with the same precision she'd shown with the rifle, like equipment modification was second nature. The terrain run the next morning was designed to be brutal. 10 miles over rough ground, full gear, no mercy. Olivia stayed in the middle of the pack, her breathing even and controlled, her steps steady despite the punishing pace. Madison was right behind her, muttering complaints the entire time. "Pick it up, charity case," she hissed through gritted teeth. "You're dragging us down." At the halfway mark, when exhaustion was starting to show on faces and form was deteriorating, Madison made her move. She nudged Olivia's elbow just enough to throw her off balance. Olivia's foot caught on a rock, and she veered off the designated path, her ankle twisting as she hit the uneven ground. Captain Harrow saw it happen. "Mitchell!" he roars, his voice carrying across the entire formation. "Broke formation! Squad loses points!" The group groaned, some shooting dirty looks in Olivia's direction. Lance turned around, his face flushed with exertion and anger. "Nice one, Mitchell. Real team player." Olivia didn't argue, didn't try to explain what had really happened. She simply got back in formation, her jaw tight, and kept running. If the twisted ankle was bothering her, her slight limp was barely noticeable. When the run finally ended, Harrow pointed directly at her. "5 extra laps. Move." The others watched, some smirking, as Olivia started running again. Her breath came in short gasps now, her face slick with sweat, but she completed every lap without complaint. When she finally finished, hands on knees, gulping air, no one offered her water. Madison tossed an empty bottle at her feet. "Hydrate with air," she said, laughing at her own cruelty. Olivia picked up the bottle, crushed it slowly in her hand, and dropped it in the trash bin. She didn't make a sound. During a night drill designed to simulate combat conditions, cadets were tasked with setting up a defensive perimeter under simulated enemy fire. Flares lit up the sky, and instructors shouted contradictory orders, creating controlled chaos. Olivia worked alone, securing a rope barrier with steady hands, while explosions echoed around them. Marcus Webb, stocky and loud, decided she made an easy target for some evening entertainment. He grabbed her rope and yanked it free, tossing it into the mud with exaggerated carelessness. "Oops," he said, grinning at his buddies. "Guess you're not cut out for this, huh?" The others nearby laughed, their flashlights bobbing as they watched the show. Olivia knelt in the mud, picked up the rope, and started over. Her fingers moved methodically, each knot precise despite the chaos around them. Marcus wasn't finished. He kicked dirt onto her hands, coating the rope in grime. "Keep trying, princess," he said. "Maybe you'll get it done by morning." The group roared with laughter, but Olivia paused, her hands going still, and looked up at him. Her voice was quiet but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "You done?" Marcus blinked, thrown off by the quiet intensity in her gaze, but he laughed it off and walked away. Olivia went back to work, her face unreadable, and had the rope barrier clean and secure in seconds. Later, when the drill ended and scores were tallied, Marcus discovered his own barrier had come loose during the exercise, costing his squad valuable points. No one had seen Olivia anywhere near his section, but Elena, watching from the sidelines, allowed herself a small smile. Watching Olivia endure this treatment while quietly demonstrating skills that made seasoned instructors take notice, what would you have done in her place? Would you have stayed silent or revealed your true abilities? Comment below and tell me, because your perspective matters just as much as what's unfolding in this story. Now, here's where things took a dramatic turn that no one saw coming. That night in the barracks, Olivia sat on her narrow bunk, pulling an old photograph from her bag. It was creased and worn at the edges, showing a younger version of herself standing next to a man in a black tactical jacket. His face was deliberately blurred in the photo, but his posture, shoulders back, eyes sharp, carried an unmistakable weight of authority and danger. She traced her finger over the photograph, her lips pressing together in what might have been remembrance or regret, then quickly tucked it away when she heard approaching footsteps. Lance walked by, tossing his towel over his shoulder with casual arrogance. "Better sleep tight, Mitchell," he said, not bothering to look at her. "Tomorrow's the shooting range. Try not to embarrass yourself more than you already have." Olivia didn't respond. She lay back on the thin mattress, hands behind her head, staring at the ceiling. Her breathing was slow and even, but her eyes remained open long after the lights went out. The long-range shooting examination was designed to be a make-or-break moment. 5 shots at 400 meters, 5 perfect bullseyes required, or immediate dismissal from the program. The pressure was intentional and brutal. The cadets lined up at the firing range, nervous energy crackling through the group. They fiddled with their scopes, whispered anxiously about wind speed and atmospheric conditions, their confidence from earlier drills nowhere to be found. Madison went first, her blonde ponytail whipping in the breeze. She missed 2 shots completely, her face pale as chalk when she stepped back from the firing line. Lance managed to hit 4 targets, cursing under his breath at the near miss that might cost him his standing in the program. Then it was Olivia's turn. Madison whispered to the cadet next to her, her voice carrying just far enough. Bet she can't even hold the rifle properly. During the precision rifle exercise, Olivia utilized professional-grade shooting equipment, including advanced optical targeting systems and specialized ammunition designed for extreme accuracy requirements. The military specification scope she adjusted featured laser range-finding capabilities and ballistic calculation technology that enabled perfect shot placement even with the deliberately misaligned rifle sights that would have caused most marksmen to miss their targets completely. Olivia settled into position behind the rifle, her movements calm and almost mechanical. She didn't spend time adjusting the scope, didn't take practice swings or test the wind. She simply aimed, breathed, and fired. 5 shots, 5 perfect hits, dead center. No hesitation between shots, no scope adjustments, no visible effort. Just cold, mechanical precision that left everyone staring in stunned silence. The range officer blinked at the target display, then at Olivia, then back at the display like his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Mitchell," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. "Perfect score." A colonel who had been observing from a distance, an older man with steel-gray hair and a chest full of ribbons, leaned forward with sudden interest. "Who trained her?" he murmured to his aide, his voice barely audible but somehow urgent. The aide shook his head. "No information in her file, sir. But that trigger control, that's not civilian training." Lance overheard and rolled his eyes dramatically. "Lucky shots," he announced, loud enough for Olivia to hear. "Let's see her do something that actually matters." But during the mandatory equipment check that followed the shooting exercise, the range officer discovered something that made his blood run cold. Olivia's rifle had a misaligned sight, a defect so subtle that no one else had noticed it, but significant enough that it should have made accurate shooting impossible. She'd compensated for the defect perfectly, adjusting her aim by muscle memory and instinct alone. The officer shook his head, muttering to himself, "That's not luck, that's pure skill." The mess hall incident the next evening was the culmination of days of building tension. Olivia had been last in the chow line, and by the time she reached the serving area, the food had run out. She sat at her usual corner table anyway, sipping water, her face calm despite her empty tray. A group of cadets led by Jenna Walsh, tall, smug, with a laugh that carried like fingernails on a chalkboard, spotted this opportunity for entertainment. Jenna walked over and deliberately dropped a half-eaten apple onto Olivia's empty tray. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with theatrical pity. "Can't have you starving, right? You need your strength for, what exactly? Carrying our bags?" The table behind her burst into laughter. Cameras came out again, recording what they thought would be another humiliation for their social media feeds. Olivia looked at the apple, then at Jenna, her eyes steady and unflinching. "Thanks," she said simply, picking it up and taking a slow, deliberate bite. Jenna's smile faltered. She'd expected tears, anger, some kind of reaction she could mock. Instead, she got this unnerving calm that made her feel like she was missing something important. The group kept laughing, but it sounded forced now, uncertain. Olivia finished the entire apple, core and all, then set her tray aside and stood to leave. As she brushed past Jenna, her shoulder made the slightest contact, just enough to make the taller woman step back involuntarily. For a moment, the mess hall went quiet, everyone watching this tiny woman who'd somehow made herself the center of attention without saying a word. The combat simulation was scheduled for the following morning, and it would prove to be the test that changed everything. Hand-to-hand combat, one-on-one matches, no weapons, no mercy. Pure skill against skill. When the pairings were announced, fate or cruel irony paired Olivia against Lance Morrison, 6 feet of muscle, ego, and barely contained aggression. He towered over her small frame, his fists already clenched, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Before the whistle even blew to start the match, Lance charged forward like a bull, grabbing Olivia's collar with both hands and slamming her back against the padded wall of the training area. The impact was violent enough that her shirt tore, the fabric ripping from her shoulder partway down her back. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Olivia looked genuinely vulnerable, pinned against the wall by someone twice her size. The squad burst into cruel laughter. "Look at that!" Madison jeered, her phone out and recording. "She's got tattoos too. What is this, some kind of biker gang?" But as Lance leaned in closer, his face inches from hers, preparing to deliver what he thought would be the final humiliation, something in Olivia's eyes made him pause. There was no fear there, no panic, just a cold, calculating patience that he didn't understand. "This isn't daycare, Mitchell," he snarled, trying to regain his momentum. "This is a battlefield. Time to go home, little girl." Olivia looked directly into his eyes, her voice steady and quiet. "Let go." Lance laughed, but his grip loosened just slightly, whether from overconfidence or some subconscious recognition that he was making a terrible mistake. That small loosening was all Olivia needed. She stepped back, and the torn shirt fell lower, revealing more of what lay beneath. And that's when everything changed. The torn fabric fell away, and suddenly the entire training yard went silent. Etched across Olivia's shoulder blade, in stark black ink that seemed to absorb the morning light, was a tattoo unlike anything the cadets had ever seen. A coiled viper, rendered in intricate detail, its body wrapped around a shattered human skull. The serpent's eyes were hollow voids, and its fangs dripped what looked like venom or blood. But it wasn't just the craftsmanship that made everyone freeze. It was the symbol itself. The laughter died in throats. Phones stopped recording. Even Lance loosened his grip, his predatory grin fading as he stared at the mark on her skin. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Madison's voice cracked slightly, the cruel confidence wavering. But Colonel James Patterson, who had been observing the training exercises from across the yard, stepped forward with movements sharp and deliberate. His weathered face had gone completely pale, and his hands were trembling, actually trembling, as he approached. "Who gave you the right to wear that mark?" he asked, his voice shaking with something between reverence and terror. The entire training ground seemed to hold its breath. Even the instructors had stopped what they were doing, sensing that something monumental was happening. Olivia stood there, her back straight despite Lance still gripping her torn shirt, the tattoo stark against her skin. She looked directly at the colonel, her voice quiet but clear enough to carry across the silent yard. "I didn't ask for it," she said. "It was given to me by Ghost Viper himself. I trained under him for 6 years." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Colonel Patterson froze completely, his eyes widening in recognition and disbelief. Then, as if his body was moving without conscious thought, he straightened to attention and snapped his hand to his forehead in a perfect salute. The other officers stared, mouths agape. An aide nearby whispered urgently, "Sir, what are you doing?" But Patterson held the salute, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "No one bears that tattoo unless they're his final student, his only student." Lance stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Madison's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete. Derek looked like he was about to be sick. The name Ghost Viper was legend in military circles. Whispered stories of a unit that didn't officially exist. Missions that never happened. Operatives who vanished from records after completing impossible tasks. 5 years ago, the entire unit had been declared KIA in a classified operation that was so secret most people weren't even sure it had actually occurred. Ghost Viper himself was mythical, a trainer so elite that he supposedly selected only one student per decade, marking them with this tattoo as proof of their lethal capabilities. Most people assumed it was just another military urban legend. Looking at Colonel Patterson's reaction, it was clear the legend was very real. An aide leaned close to the colonel, his voice urgent. "Sir, Ghost Viper was classified as—" "I know what he was classified as," Patterson cut him off sharply, never lowering his salute. "I also know what I'm looking at." Olivia acknowledged the salute with a slight nod, then gently but firmly removed Lance's hands from her shirt. The big man didn't resist. He seemed incapable of movement, staring at her like she'd transformed into something alien. "This is impossible," Madison whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Elena, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward with a knowing expression. "I wondered why you never fought back," she said quietly. "You weren't hiding because you were weak. You were hiding because you were dangerous." But Lance's pride wouldn't let him accept what he was seeing. The golden boy who had never lost at anything, who had built his entire identity on being the best, the strongest, the most elite, couldn't process that this small, quiet woman had just revealed herself to be something far beyond his understanding. "Bullshit," he snarled, his voice rising with desperate anger. "I don't care what tattoo you've got or who you claim trained you. Prove it in a real fight." The other cadets looked at each other uncertainly. Even they could sense that Lance was about to make a catastrophic mistake, but none of them had the courage to stop him. Colonel Patterson finally lowered his salute, his voice sharp with warning. "Son, I strongly advise you to—" "No," Lance interrupted, his face red with humiliation and rage. "I'm not going to be intimidated by some ink work and fancy stories. If she's so dangerous, let her prove it." He stepped back into fighting stance, his fists raised, muscles coiled for violence. "Come on, Mitchell. Show us what the great ghost viper taught you." Olivia looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since arriving at the base, something shifted in her expression. The careful blankness was replaced by something colder, more calculating. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried an edge that made everyone within earshot feel suddenly uncomfortable. "If that's what you want." She didn't bother fixing her torn shirt or adjusting her stance. She simply stood there, arms at her sides, looking almost bored, as Lance circled her like a predator sizing up prey. He charged first, throwing a wild haymaker aimed at her face. Olivia moved just enough to let it whistle past her ear, not even flinching at the near miss. Lance followed up with a left hook, then a right cross, then a combination that should have overwhelmed her with pure aggression and reach advantage. But Olivia wasn't there when his fists arrived. She moved like water, flowing around his attacks with minimal effort, her footwork so subtle it almost looked like she was standing still, while Lance exhausted himself swinging at empty air. "Hit me already!" Lance roared, his face flushed with exertion and growing desperation. Olivia didn't respond. She let him tire himself out, his swings getting progressively sloppier, his breathing becoming ragged. She was studying him, learning his patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. During the aftermath, Olivia processed the unfolding situation using advanced stress management techniques and specialized psychological protocols originally developed for elite special operations personnel. The comprehensive mental health support systems and evidence-based trauma management methods she'd learned during her classified training enabled her to maintain perfect emotional control even while facing the career-ending consequences of her revealed identity in this high-pressure military environment. When that moment came, it was over so quickly that most of the watching cadets missed it entirely. Lance threw another wild right hand, overextending himself in his frustration. Olivia stepped inside his guard, her arm sliding around his neck in what looked like an embrace. There was a brief moment where they seemed frozen together, like dancers caught mid-step. Then Lance's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. 8 seconds from start to finish. No strikes thrown, no dramatic moves, just a perfectly executed sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain with surgical precision. The training yard was absolutely silent, except for the sound of Lance's body hitting the ground. Captain Harrow walked over, his face unreadable as he looked down at Lance's unconscious form, then at Olivia, then at the assembled group of shell-shocked cadets. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the yard with absolute authority. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Olivia Mitchell is designated as an honorary instructor. You will learn from her, you will respect her, and you will follow her orders as you would mine." Olivia didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the promotion at all. She simply picked up her backpack, pulled her torn shirt closed as best she could, and began walking toward the barracks. The cadets parted before her like she was carrying something contagious, their eyes down, their earlier laughter completely forgotten. The transformation in the camp's atmosphere was immediate and profound. Word of what had happened spread through the base faster than wildfire, carried by whispered conversations and hastily shared cell phone videos. By evening, everyone from the kitchen staff to the commanding officers knew that the quiet woman they'd been dismissing as a charity case was actually something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. The live fire exercise scheduled for the next day provided Olivia with her first opportunity to lead a team. Her group included Madison, who rolled her eyes at the assignment but didn't dare voice her objections out loud anymore. As they moved through the mock urban assault course, Madison deliberately ignored Olivia's hand signals, rushing ahead and triggering a tripwire that set off a deafening alarm. The exercise came to an immediate halt, and Captain Harrow stormed over, his face red with anger. "Mitchell!" he bellowed. "Your team's a disaster!" Madison smirked, whispering to Derek loud enough for others to hear. "Told you she's useless. Tattoo doesn't make you a leader." Olivia stood there, her hands steady at her sides, and spoke calmly. Madison broke formation. I signaled her to wait. She ignored the signal. Harrow turned to Madison, who shrugged with theatrical innocence. "I didn't see any signal," she lied smoothly. The group snickered, ready to blame Olivia for the failure, despite what they had witnessed the day before. Old habits died hard, and there was comfort in returning to familiar patterns of scorn. Olivia didn't argue. She simply nodded and said, "Understood, sir." But as they reset for another attempt, someone had the presence of mind to check the overhead drone footage that recorded all training exercises. The replay showed Madison deliberately ignoring Olivia's clear hand signals, her head turned away in obvious defiance. Captain Harrow watched the footage, his jaw tightening with each second of evidence. When it finished, he docked Madison's squad 50 points and assigned her to latrine duty for a week. The group's laughter died instantly, and Madison's face went pale as she realized her lie had been exposed to everyone present. The change in Captain Harrow himself was perhaps the most noticeable transformation. The man who had dismissed Olivia as supply crew on her first day now watched her with careful attention, his harsh commands replaced by respectful requests. During briefings, he would actually pause to ask her opinion, something he'd never done with any other cadet in his 20-year career. It wasn't just respect. It was the recognition that he was in the presence of someone whose training and experience far exceeded his own, despite her deliberate attempts to hide it. 2 days later, during a break in the afternoon training schedule, a young officer approached Olivia as she sat alone, cleaning her gear. He was nervous, clutching a clipboard to his chest, his uniform crisp but his face betraying anxiety. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's someone here to see you." Olivia looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who?" I can't say, ma'am. He's waiting at the main gate." She followed him through the base, past groups of cadets who now watched her, with mixtures of fear and fascination. The walk to the entrance felt longer than it should have, filled with tension that seemed to build with each step. At the gate, a man stood waiting. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with military short hair that was going gray at the temples. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a black tactical jacket that looked deceptively casual, but screamed expensive and functional to anyone who knew what to look for. When he moved, it was with the controlled precision of someone who had spent decades in combat zones. The base guard had stepped back respectfully, clearly uncomfortable with whatever authority this man carried. Colonel Patterson was there too, standing at attention with his hands clasped behind his back. When he saw Olivia approach, he cleared his throat. "Mitchell," he said formally. "This is General Thomas Reed." The man in the black jacket looked at Olivia, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the base, her carefully controlled expression cracked. Something passed between them, recognition, relief, perhaps even love. She walked up to him, stopping just a few feet away. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice softer than anyone had heard it since her arrival. General Reed tilted his head, and the corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been a smile. "Yeah," he said simply, "I did." The cadets watching from a distance went completely silent. Madison, standing near the fence, dropped her water bottle. The plastic clattered on the concrete, but no one moved to pick it up. Colonel Patterson cleared his throat, addressing the gathered crowd in a voice that carried clear across the courtyard. "This is General Thomas Reed," he announced, pausing for effect. "Olivia's husband." The words hit like a shockwave. Madison actually staggered backward. Derek's mouth fell open. Even Elena, who had suspected Olivia was more than she appeared, looked stunned by this revelation. General Reed didn't elaborate or explain. He simply placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder, the same shoulder that bore the Black Viper tattoo, and they walked together toward her beat-up pickup truck. The engine roared to life with a sound that seemed far too powerful for such an old vehicle, and they drove off, dust kicking up behind them in a cloud that obscured them from view. No one moved until the truck had disappeared completely down the access road. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Lance, who had been transferred to the medical facility after his encounter with Olivia, found himself facing a full military review board within 72 hours. His attack on what was now known to be a classified operative was deemed conduct unbecoming of a military officer. He was discharged within the week, his dreams of Special Forces glory ending with a less than honorable mark on his permanent record. His family name, once respected in military circles, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and assumptions. Madison's troubles were more public and arguably more devastating. The video of her taunting Olivia, recorded by her own friends and posted to social media, went viral within hours of the revelation about Olivia's true identity. The defense contractor that had been sponsoring her training pulled their support immediately, releasing a statement about values incompatible with our corporate mission. Her social media accounts, once filled with admiring followers, became battlegrounds of criticism and outrage. She deleted her accounts within days, but the internet doesn't forget, and screenshots lived on across countless platforms. Derek found himself reassigned to the worst duties the base had to offer: kitchen patrol, latrine cleaning, equipment maintenance in the desert heat. Every unpleasant task that needed doing somehow found its way to his schedule. When he tried to complain, he was curtly reminded that his behavior toward a decorated veteran was a matter of permanent record. Captain Harrow faced his own reckoning. A quiet meeting with base leadership resulted in mandatory retraining on leadership principles and respect for personnel, regardless of appearance or background. His formerly harsh demeanor was replaced by something more thoughtful, more careful. The man who had once dismissed Olivia as supply crew now questioned every assumption he made about the people under his command. But perhaps the most significant change was in the base's culture itself. The story of Olivia Mitchell became required reading for new recruits, a stark lesson about the dangers of judging people by their appearance. Training protocols were revised to emphasize respect and inclusion, with severe penalties for harassment or discrimination. Elena found herself in an unexpected position of influence, her early kindness to Olivia when everyone else had shown cruelty, earning her recognition from the command structure. She was selected for advanced training programs and found mentors eager to support someone who had demonstrated the wisdom to see past surface appearances. During a final review of the cadet program 3 weeks later, the base's top brass gathered to evaluate the training cycle's outcomes. Olivia's name inevitably came up, and the room fell silent. A junior officer, recently transferred and unaware of the full story, suggested that her abrupt departure indicated a lack of leadership potential. Colonel Patterson leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. "Mitchell's file is classified above your clearance level," he said. "But I'll tell you this, she's the only person who's ever walked through those gates who could have run this entire base blindfolded while half asleep." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope marked with official stamps and a Black Viper emblem. He slid it across the conference table. "Her training evaluations from Ghost Viper himself," Patterson continued, Rid them if you want to understand what real excellence looks like. Then tell me again who's lacking leadership potential. The junior officer opened the envelope with trembling hands. His face went progressively paler as he read, his eyes widening with each line of text. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully and didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. Meanwhile, Olivia and General Reed had disappeared as completely as if they'd never existed. Some reports placed them at a remote training facility in Montana, running advanced programs for special operations candidates. Others suggested they were overseas, part of a classified unit that didn't appear on any official rosters. But in the barracks where she'd once slept, cadets still found reminders of her presence. A young recruit named Sam discovered an old photo tucked under one of the bunks, the same creased image she'd looked at that night, showing her younger self standing next to a man whose face was deliberately blurred. Sam held it up to the light, squinting at the mysterious figure in the black jacket. "Who was she really?" he asked his bunkmates. No one answered directly, but Elena, who had transferred to advanced training but occasionally visited to share her experience with newer recruits, looked at the photo thoughtfully. "She was exactly who she appeared to be," Elena said finally. "Someone who didn't need to prove herself to anyone. The question isn't who she was, it's whether we're smart enough to recognize that kind of strength when we see it again." The photo made its way from cadet to cadet, becoming something of a talisman. New recruits would study it, trying to understand how someone so ordinary-looking could have hidden such extraordinary capabilities. It became part of the base's folklore, a visual reminder that true strength rarely announces itself. 6 months later, the consequences were still rippling outward. The defense contractor that had dropped Madison faced ongoing public relations challenges as social media users continued to share the story of the unassuming woman who had proven herself superior to their elite candidate. Their stock price never fully recovered from the viral backlash. Lance's discharge became a case study in military academies, used to teach future officers about the importance of humility and respect. His name was scrubbed from commendation lists and honor rolls, his achievements overshadowed by his spectacular failure of judgment. The base itself became something of a pilgrimage site for military personnel who had heard the story. Visitors would ask to see the training yard where the confrontation had occurred, the mess hall where Olivia had endured the bullying, the barracks where she had quietly prepared for each day's challenges. But Olivia Mitchell herself remained a ghost, her true whereabouts known only to the highest levels of military command. Occasionally, reports would surface of a small, unassuming woman appearing at training facilities around the world, observing exercises, offering quiet corrections to techniques, then disappearing before anyone could confirm her identity. General Reed, when asked by his peers about his wife's current activities, would smile enigmatically and change the subject. But those who knew him well noticed changes in his demeanor, a relaxation of tension, a satisfaction that suggested someone who had found peace after years of searching. The story spread beyond military circles, becoming popular on social media platforms and inspiring countless discussions about hidden potential, the danger of assumptions, and the quiet strength of those who choose service over self-promotion. Hashtags like "Don't Judge," "The Book," and "Quiet Strength" trended for weeks. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the individuals who had witnessed Olivia's transformation from target to legend. Each of them carried the memory of that moment when the torn shirt revealed not just a tattoo, but a complete reversal of everything they thought that they understood about poor, respect, and true capability. Years later, they would tell the story to their own subordinates, their children, anyone who would listen. Not as a tale of revenge or comeuppance, but as a reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one nobody notices. The training facility continued to operate, but it was forever changed by the woman who had arrived in a battered pickup truck and left in the passenger seat of the same vehicle, having proven that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the one you never intended to make at all. As autumn settled over the base, bringing cooler temperatures and new cycles of training, old-timers would sometimes point out the corner table where Olivia had sat alone, the patch of ground where Lance had fallen unconscious, the spot where Colonel Patterson had offered his unprecedented salute. These places became unofficial monuments to the idea that strength doesn't always announce itself, that true power often wears the humblest disguise, and that the people we dismiss as insignificant might just be the most significant of all. But the story wasn't quite over. On a quiet evening in November, 8 months after Olivia had driven away with General Reed, an encrypted phone rang in a secure facility 2,000 miles away. The woman who answered it looked remarkably like the maintenance worker who had once endured harassment at a NATO training base, but her eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there before. The voice on the other end spoke a single phrase: Code Phoenix. Olivia's grip tightened on the phone. Phoenix had been Ghost Viper's final operation, the one that had supposedly killed him and scattered his organization to the winds. If someone was using that code name, it meant the past she thought she'd buried was clawing its way back to the surface. "I thought Phoenix was terminated," she said carefully. "So did we," the voice replied. "But we just intercepted communications that suggest otherwise. The target from the original mission? He's alive, and he knows about you." Olivia closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She looked across the room at General Reed, who was reading classified reports by lamplight. He glanced up, saw her expression, and immediately understood that their brief period of peace was ending. "When?" she asked into the phone. 48 hours, the usual place." The line went dead. Reed set down his papers and walked over to her, his expression grave but unsurprised. They had both known this moment would come eventually. The kind of enemies Ghost Viper had made didn't simply disappear because convenient paperwork declared them dead. "How long?" he asked. "I don't know," Olivia admitted. "Maybe weeks, maybe longer." He nodded, accepting what he'd always known would happen eventually. "I'll make the arrangements." As Olivia began preparing for what would undoubtedly be her most dangerous mission yet, she thought about the cadets she'd left behind at the training base. They were probably graduating now, receiving their assignments, beginning the careers that would define the rest of their lives. Some of them had learned the lesson she'd tried to teach through her example. Others, perhaps, were still waiting for their own moment of reckoning, when life would force them to confront the difference between what they thought they knew and what was actually true. The phone rang again. This time, the voice was different, younger, more urgent. "Mitchell, this is Agent Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. We have a situation that requires your specific skill set." "I'm listening." 3 of our deep cover operatives have gone missing in Eastern Europe. Before they disappeared, they managed to transmit a single word: Viper. Olivia felt her blood turn cold. If Ghost Viper was alive, if he was operating in the shadows again, then everything she thought she'd left behind was about to become very real, very quickly. "I need 48 hours to wrap up here," she said. "You have 24. This can't wait." The line went dead, leaving Olivia standing in the quiet room with General Reed, both of them understanding that the woman who had once hidden her identity as a maintenance worker was about to step back into a world where such deceptions were matters of life and death. She walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful landscape, knowing it might be the last moment of tranquility she would have for a very long time. "The past never stays buried, does it?" she murmured. Reed joined her at the window, his hand finding hers. "No," he said quietly, "but maybe that's not always a bad thing. Maybe some ghosts are meant to be faced." As night settled over their temporary sanctuary, Olivia Mitchell began the mental preparation for returning to a world she'd tried to leave behind. The process was as methodical as everything else she did: a careful inventory of skills that had lain dormant, a review of protocols she'd hoped never to use again, and the gradual shuttering of the peaceful life she'd built with Reed in the months since leaving the training base. She moved through their small cabin with quiet efficiency, her hands automatically reaching for equipment that had been stored in hidden compartments throughout their home: false identities, encrypted communication devices, weapons that had been cleaned and maintained despite her hope that they would never be needed again. Each item she touched brought back memories of missions that officially never happened, of people who had depended on her ability to become invisible until the moment when invisibility was no longer an option. Reed watched her prepare, understanding that the woman he'd married was transforming before his eyes into something harder, more dangerous. The gentle softening that had come with civilian life was melting away, replaced by the cold professionalism that had made her Ghost Viper's most trusted protege. It was like watching someone put on armor, piece by piece, until the vulnerable human beneath was completely protected by layers of lethal competence. The phone calls had been brief, professional, stripped of emotion. But Olivia knew that behind those clinical exchanges lay a web of international crisis that required someone with her unique combination of skills, the ability to hide in plain sight, to be dismissed and underestimated until the moment when such underestimation became a weapon more deadly than any blade or bullet. She thought about the training base, about the cadets who were probably preparing for their final evaluations. Even now, they had learned to see past appearances, at least some of them had. Elena would carry that lesson with her throughout her career, becoming the kind of leader who looked deeper than surface impressions. Others, like Derek and Madison, had learned harder truths about the consequences of cruelty and assumption. But there would be new cadets arriving soon, fresh faces filled with the same arrogance and prejudices that had initially greeted her. The cycle would repeat itself, as it always did, until someone came along to shatter their preconceptions once again. She hoped that when that moment arrived, there would be people like Elena to bridge the gap between mockery and understanding. The quiet woman who had once endured humiliation, rather than reveal her true capabilities, was about to step back into the shadows, where such capabilities were not just useful, but essential for survival. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was psychological, a return to a mindset where trust was earned through actions, not words, and where the ability to appear harmless was often the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In the classified briefings that would follow, analysts would describe her as a high-value asset with unique operational characteristics. They would enumerate her skills, her success rate, her psychological profile, but they would miss the most important element, the hard-won wisdom that came from understanding what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, considered irrelevant. That experience at the training base hadn't just been an unfortunate chapter in her life. It had been a masterclass in human nature, a reminder of how quickly people revealed their true character when they believed themselves to be in positions of power over those they considered inferior. Such knowledge was invaluable in her line of work, where understanding human weakness was often more important than physical strength or technical skill. The cadets at the training base would never know how their story had ended, or rather, how it had begun all over again. They would continue their careers, some rising to positions of leadership, others finding their own paths through the complex world of military service. But each of them would carry some piece of her lesson with them, whether they realized it or not. In moments when they were tempted to dismiss someone based on appearance or background, perhaps they would remember the quiet woman with the torn shirt and the Black Viper tattoo. But somewhere in the classified files of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a new operation was taking shape, one that would require someone with the patience to endure mockery, the strength to remain silent under pressure, and the lethal skills that came with bearing the mark of the Black Viper. The missions would be different, the stakes higher, the enemies more sophisticated than the bullies she'd faced at the training base. But the fundamental challenge would remain the same: how to use others' assumptions about weakness and insignificance as weapons against them. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very qualities that had made her a target for harassment, her small stature, her quiet demeanor, her unremarkable appearance, were precisely what made her invaluable as an operative. In a world where everyone expected danger to look intimidating, someone who looked like she belonged behind a service counter or in a maintenance uniform could move through spaces that would be impossible for more obvious threats to penetrate. As she packed the last of her specialized equipment, Olivia reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought her from the daughter of wealth and privilege to the student of a legendary ghost, and finally to a woman who could choose when to be invisible and when to reveal the steel beneath the surface. Each identity had taught her something essential, but it was the combination of all of them that made her uniquely suited for the challenges ahead. The world beyond their sanctuary was dangerous in ways that civilians could never fully comprehend. It was populated by people who used violence as a language, who treated human life as a commodity, who believed that power came from the ability to instill fear. Against such enemies, the conventional tools of warfare were often inadequate. What was needed was something more subtle, more unexpected, someone who could walk into their midst unnoticed and unrecognized until it was far too late for them to mount any defense. Sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought by the people no one expects to fight them at all. And sometimes, the woman everyone underestimated turns out to be exactly the person the world needs most. But such women remain hidden until the crucial moment when the world's very survival depends on their quiet, lethal grace.